I live in a very ordinary house, nothing special. No cemeteries nearby, no burned-out mental hospitals, nothing like that. All this happens in my apartment, in my room, under my couch. Long enough ago, I began to notice that there was something strange in our apartment. Or someone, I don't know. Ever since I was a kid, I've been used to rustling, shadows, clicks. Considering the fact that we sometimes have mice in the attic, my parents don't pay any attention to it, chalking it all up to rodents that don't cause any trouble. But despite my parents' assurances that everything was normal and that it was all in my head, I sensed that it wasn't. I felt something, and that something is living in my room. That's why I have a pathological fear of dark and closed rooms. Maybe I should tell you about the couch under which things have been happening lately. It all happens at night when I unfold the sofa to sleep. For a long time now, I've noticed that someone's been there, sleeping. Sometimes at night I hear fidgeting, sighing, grumbling when I turn to the other side, probably disturbing his sleep. No, don't ask. I don't look under the bed at night for any reason. So that day, the whole family left for another city, and I stayed behind to study for my upcoming exams. When I unfolded the couch before going to bed, I saw some blood and small bones underneath. As I jumped away from the couch in horror and disgust, I thought I might have accidentally squashed the creature when I pulled the couch apart. But the bones were gnawed. I realized that the nocturnal creature under my bed not only slept there, but also dined on mice, judging by the size of the bones. I spent the whole day in suspense, waiting for another night. I was very afraid to go to bed. Then, after performing all the rituals, I went to bed, leaving the light on as usual. As I covered my eyes, I heard a rustle, and at the same moment the light switch clicked. The room was plunged into darkness. I couldn't open my eyes from the horror that overcame me. There was a rustling in the direction of my bed, and then the familiar fidgeting under it. Then everything went quiet, but I did not open my eyes, and from the shock I soon fell asleep. The next day it was very scary to unfold the sofa, but something told me that it might get angry, so I unfolded the couch, but this time I put a piece of sausage under the bed. I turned off the light, lay down on the bed and waited, curious to see what would happen. But nothing happened, and soon I fell asleep. In the morning, as you can imagine, I couldn't find it. So I started putting a sausage or something under the bed every night. This went on for a month and a half. Surprisingly, I began to sleep well. The darkness became much easier to bear, the usual tension, as if a hand had been removed. I satisfy its hunger and it doesn't touch me. Believe me, I'm happy with the way we live together. But 2 weeks later, something really terrible happened. I was left alone again. The apartment is quite stuffy. We live in the south, so I leave the balcony open at night. I woke up in the night to noises in the apartment, and it woke up too. Someone was brazenly walking around in the next room, opening cabinets and nightstands. At first, I thought my roommate had gone on a rampage, but it was there with me, under my couch. There was no doubt about it. It was a thief who had snuck into the apartment. Even though I live on the 5th floor, it's easy to get from the roof to our balcony, and it's no harder to get to the roof than it is to get to the neighborhood store. There was no phone near me. I sat quietly, trying not to make a sound. But then the door opened and a masked man entered the room. When he saw me, he lunged at me with a knife, but he did not reach me. One step away from the bed, he seemed to stumble and fell on his back. At the same moment, something pulled him sharply under the bed. I did not hear the robber's screams, only the disgusting slurping under my bed. I could not sleep that night, listening with horror to my lodger's meal. In the morning, I hesitated for a long time to look under the couch, but when my curiosity got the better of me, there was nothing there. This time it had worked. There wasn't even a knife left. The only detail were dog teeth marks on the wooden mount, as if the dog had chewed on the wood. And then it hit me. Many years ago, when I was 4 years old, our dog Linda died. She died of old age in my room. I don't remember the details, but I know for a fact that my nightmare began at that exact time. According to my parents, Linda was very sweet, often cuddled with me, and slept next to my crib. But what if it really was her? Well, for 2 weeks now it's been quiet. The ghost of the dog, I hope it's her, doesn't take food anymore. I'm sleeping soundly. The only thing I fear is that my ghost's appetite will grow, and then the creature under my couch will eat our family. But Linda was a good dog. Jake stepped through the gate and walked straight down the path to the chatter of his friends. It was an annual camp tradition among the teenagers. After a story of a long tragedy in a nearby family, usually told by the counselors around the campfire, one of the bravest campers had to be chosen and sent deep into the woods in the middle of the night. The task was to follow a trail to the abandoned ruins of a burning house and bring back an item as evidence. It was midsummer, hot during the day, but the woods were quite cool at night. It was a good thing Jake wasn't wearing shorts and a tank top, but a hooded sweatshirt and jeans. He decided for himself, the sooner I start, the sooner I finish, and move deeper into the woods. The cheering began to fade, as did the light from the camp's lanterns, and the forest grew darker and darker. The rustling of leaves and the crunch of twigs underfoot were accompanied by the sound of cicadas and the hooting of an owl. Jake walked on, looking around nervously. He liked this kind of atmosphere, but now he was alone in the dense forest, and it was a little unsettling. Soon the path led to a clearing that was well lit by the moon. The cold light made Jake's already pale face look dead white. It was about 1.5 miles to the fire-damaged house. If I followed the trail, it could be reached on foot in half an hour. Jake sped up. After 40 minutes on the road, he stopped and looked around. Have I lost my way? Jake thought, and closed his eyes. When he opened them, the darkness lifted, and he could see the outline of a house among the trees. That's it! Jake jogged lightly, both relieved and hesitant. His instincts told him to turn and run. But what would his friends think? I'm not a coward. Just take something from the house and go back, no big deal. But goosebumps still ran down his back as Jake approached the gate of the house. The grass on the property was scorched. This was alarming because the story said the fire had happened a long time ago. Why hadn't the grass changed since then, as if it had burned a few days ago? Finally, putting aside his doubts, he went to the door, which was rotten, and stepped inside. Immediately, the smell of burning hit his nose, a smell that had not weathered for so many years. In the hallway was a table surrounded by 2 chairs. There was a closet, or what was left of it, against the charred wall opposite the front door, and to the left of it was a passageway to the back of the house, a passageway from the hallway to the guest room. Jake took a slow step, as if afraid to disturb the air itself, and headed that way, hoping to find some trinket and get back to camp as soon as possible. As he walked on, looking around, he felt something under his feet and lowered his eyes. In front of him was a knife, an unusual knife. The handle was disproportionately long compared to the short blade. It looked like a prison sword. Satisfied with his find, Jake tucked it into his backpack and headed for the exit. But suddenly he felt an unprecedented surge of fear and cold. Through the noise of the forest, coming from the doorway, he heard a faint, barely perceptible sound. A faint, heavy one. Someone stood behind him, and the breathing betrayed its presence. Jake stiffened. He stood there, afraid to move. Meanwhile, the breathing came closer. But the footsteps. Something seemed to be floating in the air. Afraid to turn around, Jake's eyes darted quickly around the room until they landed on the broken mirror to his right. Seeing it, the boy broke into a sweat and almost fainted. Fear prevented him from doing so. Directly behind him stood a child of about 10 years. A little boy. He stood motionless, staring right at Jake. Why the panic, it seemed? What could a 10-year-old kid do to a 15-year-old teenager? Nothing. But the unknown child continued to approach with noiseless steps. He walked, and gradually the moonlight showed the outline of his face. His eyes were pale blue, and his face, which showed no emotion, was covered with cracks like dried gray clay. Scared to death, Jake sprinted away. He ran as fast as he could. About halfway to the camp, he stopped to catch his breath, but the fear struck again. The crunch of twigs echoed through the clearing. Someone was approaching him fast. Those footsteps, they were coming from every direction. "Who's there?" Jake yelled in confusion, reaching for his knife in his backpack, but he didn't have time and ended up on the ground. The blows began to rain down on his face, one after the other. He tried to see his attacker, but his eyes were blurred. He could hear his bones crunching and he was about to pass out, but fortunately the blows stopped. When Jake regained consciousness and looked up, a teenager about his age was standing in front of him. His eyes were completely black, full of hate, and his face was shrunken with rage. He was looking at him and seemed eager to finish what he'd started, but something or someone was preventing it. Jake looked closer, and from behind him he could see a much smaller figure. The same blue-eyed kid with tears on his face was pulling the teenager's arm away and yelling something. He seemed to be trying to protect Jake, and before he could think about it, a punch to the face knocked him from his back to his side. He let out a soft moan and everything went out. The next morning he was found. Near the camp gate, the boy lay on his side, covered in dried blood. He was alive but barely conscious. The doctor said Jake had 2 broken ribs, internal bleeding, a concussion, and marveled at how he had survived. A few weeks later, when Jake was on the mend, he showed the item he had brought from the destroyed house. The boys later learned that the knife belonged to the Winters family, specifically the eldest son. He was violent and had sadistic tendencies, which cannot be said of his younger brother, who was characterized by incredible kindness and most likely saved Jake that terrible night. The brothers' bodies were never found, and they were reported missing. After the incident, punishments for disciplinary infractions in the camps were increased. But still, every year there are new thrill seekers who manage to leave the camp and go into the woods. This story happened in one of the hospitals on the outskirts of my town. I went to work there after graduating from medical school. I was hired without any questions because some nurses had recently quit, and there was a shortage of staff. After working for a few weeks, I stayed on night duty that same day. There were a few patients, so there was not much to do. It all happened as I was starting my nightly rounds. As I was going up to the 2nd floor, I stopped when I heard a baby crying in the silence of the hospital. As I listened, I realized it was coming from the 3rd floor, not far from me. My fear grew. I knew for a fact that we didn't have any babies in the hospital right now, and the 3rd floor was empty. When I got to the right floor, I looked around. I couldn't see anything in the half-light of the hallway, but there were sounds coming from a room. I walked slowly down the hall, peering into the half-open rooms. The baby's cries increased with each step, echoing across the floor. When I finally reached the right door, I opened it and stepped inside. Someone was sitting on one of the beds under a blanket. He was slowly rocking from side to side, crying audibly. "Hey," I said, stepping closer to the bed and holding out my hand. The swaying stopped abruptly, as did the crying. I threw back the blanket and was horrified to find no one there. I started to back away, my mouth hanging open, when the door to the room slammed shut. I screamed in surprise and ran over to it, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. My skin was covered in goosebumps as I heard a small, barefoot person running down the hallway. I took out my cell phone and started to call the security guard who was at the hospital every night, but there was no ring. In desperation, I started looking around until I noticed a small figure under the farthest bed. It didn't move at first, but after a few seconds it jumped out and darted in my direction, laughing out loud. Shocked, I rushed to the door of the room, which fortunately was already open, and ran to the stairs. Laughing and crying came from all directions. When I reached the stairs, I turned around and was stunned. Behind me, children of all ages were running and crying. As I stumbled, I fell and rolled down the stairs to the 2nd floor and saw that no one was coming down after me. It was only somewhere in the depths of the 3rd floor that I heard children's voices. "Marie!" shouted the guard, running up. "Are you all right? What happened?" "There, children." I pointed to the third floor and fainted. I woke up in the early morning in the ward with my leg and arm bandaged. 5 minutes later, a nurse came and told me everything. Turned out that there had been a fire in the hospital a long time ago, and the children's ward was on the third floor. The fire was not very strong, but there was a lot of smoke and many children suffocated. Since then, after the renovation, strange things started to happen on the third floor. Staff and patients heard children's footsteps, laughing and crying in the hallways and wards. At night, small children's figures would run around the floor. In general, they stopped having patients there because there were too many complaints. The staff also started to quit and find work in other hospitals, and things seemed to calm down, and no one had seen ghosts for a long time, so they didn't tell me anything right away. Anyway, I don't work there anymore. It's kind of scary to live with ghosts in the neighborhood. Now I work in another hospital and everything is fine, but I still think that on the outskirts of the city, somewhere in the dark corners of the third floor, there is that terrible, full of agony and suffering cries of dead children.